Miss James, and I'm going to be teaching you writing workshop for today, Thursday, April 2nd. I know a lot of you have been working on your westward expansion research reports. You chose a topic, you've been taking notes and organizing those notes, and you have been flash drafting. So today we're going to do a bit of revision, but not just any revision. We're going to be revising using the lens of a historian. We are writing about history, and we want to make sure that we're including all of our historical thinking into our writing. So let's get started. So our teaching point today, writers of history reports use the lens of a historian while writing. This means that they think about how the time and place they are studying impacts events in history. So how does the place that the events are happening and the time period, how does that affect the events that are happening? How are we going to do this? We're going to reread our draft or our notes this far. We're going to take a closer look at a map. Your thinking and writing will deepen if you take a look at multiple kinds of maps. So not just, there's many different kinds of maps. We don't just want to look at one. Then we want to think about how does the geography of the place affect the events that occurred there in history. Then we're going to revise our writing, including more of the details of the geography of the place. So let's go through that. Some academic vocabulary that we're going to need is geography, which means landforms, climate, and places. Another word is revision. We hear that word revision all the time, but what does it really mean? It means seeing again, revision, or seeing with a new lens. A question we want to think about is how does the geography of a place impact how events there unfolded in history? And we want to put on the lens of a historian. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reread part of my draft. You should probably reread your whole draft, but for the sake of this lesson, I'm going to reread part of my draft. The Indian Removal Act. A law called the Indian Removal Act was supposed to pay the 5 tribes for their land. In exchange, they were supposed to move west of the Mississippi River. The reality was very different from the law. The Native Americans were forced off their lands. They had no choice after they were pushed to sign unfair treaties. Not every nation went at the same time. Beginning in 1831 with the Choctaw, the tribes were forced to move west or were forcibly removed by the U.S. Army. On the trail. See, I'm organizing it into categories with subheadings. At first, many were forced to wait in prison camps, and many went through horrible conditions. There was not enough food or ways to keep warm in bad weather. Finally, after many died, they were forced to march over 1,300 miles to a strange land. Some of the tribes considered the land west of Mississippi to be a desert. Some of the camp survivors made the trip by river, but most walked the trail. One leader of the Cherokee, John Ross, tried to save lives by splitting his people into smaller groups to make it easier to look for food. But nothing could stop over a quarter of the Cherokee people from death. So now I want to look at some maps and see if I can gain some information about this event in history. So the Native Americans moving west. So I'm noticing this map and it's showing me different states, but I don't think the country was broken into states at the time. But it's helping me see how far they really had to go. I know they said 1,300 miles, but I can see that some of the tribes moved from like Florida and then through like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. That's like 4 states per tribe. So that gives some context to that 1,300 miles. I also noticed that different tribes had different routes. Some went through land, and it looked like the Seminole tribe went through water. I wonder if they like had a boat or something like that. Let's see what this says. Native American removal from the southeast. The map shows the routes of the 5 southeastern tribes that were forced to leave their homelands in the southeast and live in Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. A surprising number of Americans opposed Indian removal. The first bill in Congress passed only by 103 votes to 97. So that's teaching me that some of the white people actually didn't want Indian removal. That's interesting. But the demand for new lands was high, and former Army officers such as Andrew Jackson used their experiences as Indian fighters to gain political popularity and get elected to office. Interesting. So it sounds like Andrew Jackson, who I know was one of the presidents, tried to get popularity by saying that he was good at fighting Native Americans. Okay, let's look at another map now. So this is actually a climate map. Remember I told you that there's different kinds of maps? So this was a map of Trail of Tears. This is a map of climate. So this is showing you the different kinds of climate. So it looks like in here in Oklahoma, but right like north of Texas, is where the Indians were moved to. So if I look at the key, it says Seminard, that means desert. So like they're more in a desert climate. And then they had come from these states like Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas. And those were more humid subtropical. So that's showing me that they really had to change up what kind of climate they lived in. So that probably affected their way of life too. Like, if they had a certain way of hunting or gathering food, that's going to really have to change or adjust when they move places. So now let me use what I've learned from studying these maps, and I'm going to revise or add some more geographical details into my draft. So I noticed a lot of places in this section on the trail that I could add some details, and I think I'm going to do that in orange. No, I'll put it in pink so you can really see the revisions I'm making. So at first, many were forced to wait in prison camps, and many went through horrible conditions. There was not enough food or ways to keep warm in bad weather. Finally, after many died, they were forced to march over 1,300 miles, and I'm going to add that this is about 4 states. Just so that people have a context and understand how large that is. About 4 states to a strange land. Some of the tribes considered the land west of Mississippi to be a desert. And now I know that this desert climate is different than the subtropical humid climate than they're used to. Let me put this in pink so I can show that's revision. When you're revising too, you might want to also put it into a different color. It'll help your teacher see which parts were revisions. Some of the camp survivors made the trip by river. Okay, so now I know it just wasn't some of the camp survivors. I can be specific. And I know that it was the Seminole tribe that made the trip by river. The Seminole tribe made the trip by river, but most walked the trail. One leader, the Cherokee, John Ross, tried to save lives by splitting his people into smaller groups to make it easier to look for food. But nothing could stop over a quarter of the Cherokee people from death. So that's how I revised my draft to include more geographical details that I had gained from looking closely at maps. So now you are going to try this work. So what you are going to do independently is you're going to reread your draft or your notes thus far. You're going to take a closer look at a map. Within your assignment, you're going to have a few different maps attached so you can look carefully at those. And there might have been maps in some of the articles you've read. So if there was a map that you saw, take a look at that too. Your thinking and writing will deepen if you look at multiple kinds of maps. Think. How does the geography of the place affect the events that occurred there in history? Then you're going to revise your writing, including more details of the geography of the place. Can't wait to see what you write. Have a great day. Bye, 5th graders.